The first time I heard my daughter try to erase me, I was standing outside a frosted glass conference room with the old brass key to my lake house digging half moons into my palm. On the other side of the door, Caroline said, calm and clean and practiced, "He's not getting a penny. Sell the cabin, liquidate the shop, and put the allowance in the trust. He doesn't need direct access anymore." My knees dipped so hard I had to catch myself on the wall. My tongue tasted like I'd bitten through foil. Then I sent one photograph. By the end of that week, the people who had been planning my quiet disposal were the ones trying to explain themselves in public. But before I tell you what was in that photograph, you need to know why the lawyer called me first, what my daughter thought I would never piece together, and what that old brass key had already seen. If you've ever been loved in public and used in private, subscribe. But stay with me, because the sentence I overheard wasn't even the worst part. The first crack had shown up weeks earlier in a kitchen drawer that should have held nothing more dangerous than rubber bands and takeout menus. My wife May died on a Thursday in early October when the leaves around the lake were just starting to curl at the edges and go copper. Pancreatic cancer. Fast, merciless, humiliating in the way all clean hospital sheets eventually become humiliating. We had been married 41 years. I still catch myself about to turn and tell her something stupid, like the tomatoes came in late, or the right headlight on the truck is acting up again. Grief doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it's just reaching for another cup when there's only one on the counter. I was 67 when she died, and I had already spent most of my life doing what fathers from my generation did best, turning love into labor and hoping the people inside the house understood what the labor meant. I owned a small millwork shop 20 minutes from town. Cabinets, stair rails, built-ins, old house repairs, the sort of work people call beautiful, after they forgot you spent 12 hours breathing sawdust to make it that way. I built Caroline's crib from ash. I built her first desk from maple. I built the lake house in stages, room by room, paycheck by paycheck, with May handing me nails from a coffee can and laughing whenever I swore at the level. By the time Caroline's was 40, married, and living in one of those bright white houses that always smell faintly of citrus and money, I had paid for more of her life than she probably remembered. Ballet when she was 8, braces when she was 12. College tuition once her scholarship fell short. Half her wedding when Stephen's parents suddenly tightened their budget, after bragging for months about the open bar. 6 years later, when Stephen's restaurant went under and the state came after him for payroll taxes, I cashed out a retirement certificate to keep their names off a public notice. Caroline cried into my shirt that night and said, "Dad, I'll never forget this. People mean things when they say them in a crisis. They just don't always keep meaning them after the crisis passes." After May died, I tried staying alone at the lake house. For a while I told myself the quiet was decent. Noble, even. I'd make coffee before dawn, stand on the back porch in that gray-blue hour, and listen to the aluminum flagpole tap softly in the wind. But grief changes your balance. 2 months after the funeral, I slipped off a ladder at the shop while changing a ballast above the finishing table and tore up my knee. Nothing dramatic. Just one wrong step, one stupid twist. And suddenly I couldn't manage stairs well for a few weeks. Caroline came over that same night with soup in a Dutch oven and concern arranged perfectly across her face. "You're not staying out there by yourself like this," she said, taking my pill bottle out of my hand as if it already belonged to her. "You'll come stay with us until you're steady." Stephen leaned in the doorway behind her in a navy quarter zip that probably cost more than my first table saw. "It's just practical, Arthur. Temporary support. Family structure. Family structure." He talked like an HR department with veneers. I should have said no. Instead, I packed 2 duffel bags, my shaving kit, May's old flannel blanket, and the brass key to the lake house with its faded blue ribbon still tied through the top. May had looped that ribbon on it years ago after Caroline lost the spare during one wild teenage summer. Back when our daughter came home barefoot and sunburned and still thought our porch light meant safety. "Bright ribbon," May had said, nodding it while standing at the sink. "So nobody forgets this one matters." I moved into the guest room over Caroline's garage, under the slanted ceiling where the air always smelled faintly of fabric softener and drywall dust. Temporary became a month. A month became 3. Then winter came down hard, my knee healed slower than it should have, and somehow I was still there by spring, commuting to the shop in the mornings and coming back to a house that never quite let me forget I was a visitor. Carolyn did not become cruel all at once. That's not how these things usually happen. First, she became efficient. She put a pill organizer on the counter and said it would help me stay on track. She started opening my mail, in case anything urgent slips through. She moved May's blanket from the guest bed to a linen closet, because the faded plaid didn't go with the room. She asked me not to leave my work boots by the mudroom bench because Stephen had clients over sometimes, and the dust made the house feel chaotic. At dinner, if I reached for salt before tasting something, she'd smile and say, "Dad, let's make one healthy choice tonight." It all sounded harmless if you were hearing it from across the room. Concern always does, but concern has a texture when it curdles. It sounds like your daughter laughing a little too quickly when you misplace your reading glasses. It looks like your son-in-law taking your truck keys off the hook and saying, "I moved them so you wouldn't forget where they are." It feels like sitting at a stone kitchen island in your own child's home while she discusses your future in the same tone she uses for backsplash samples. And then there was the drawer. One Tuesday morning in March, I went looking for a roll of stamps and found a glossy brochure tucked under a stack of grocery coupons. Brookside Memory Residence. Smiling silver-haired people on the front, all of them too clean, too supervised, too delighted by fruit platters. Someone had circled private one-bedroom suite and written refundable community fee in blue ink. I held that brochure for a long time. When Caroline walked in, I lifted it and asked, "What's this?" She didn't miss a beat. "Oh, that's for Stephen's aunt." We were comparing places for his cousins. Maybe I would have believed her if she had looked at the brochure first. Instead, she looked at me. That wasn't the part that settled wrong. The part that settled wrong came the next morning, when I reached into my jacket pocket for the brass key and felt dampness. The blue ribbon tied through it was streaked with dried red clay. Not lake mud, clay from the road that ran up to my cabin. I stood there in the mudroom, jacket half on, key in my hand, and felt something cold work its way down my spine. I had not been to the cabin in 6 weeks. The road was still soft from thaw. Anybody who drove up there would come back wearing that same stubborn clay on their boots. And anyone who used the key would have had to take it from my coat while I slept or showered. At breakfast, Stephen was on speakerphone with somebody talking about sightlines, deck repairs, and maximizing waterfront language without overpromising. When he saw me, he lowered the volume and smiled that polished smile he saved for people he underestimated. "What?" he said. "I'm helping a guy with a listing." I sat down. My knee ached. The eggs were too soft. Caroline kept tapping her thumbnail on her coffee mug. Nobody mentioned the mud. 3 days later, my foreman Leo told me a real estate photographer had called the shop asking the easiest route to the cabin. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, Leo said. "Figured maybe you were selling and didn't want chatter." I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. "Selling?" I said. "That place still has my wife in the walls." Leo looked at me for a second too long and changed the subject. That should have been enough. It wasn't the next Sunday. Caroline insisted I come to brunch at their country club because Stephen had important people there, and she didn't want me sitting alone. I wore the navy blazer May liked on me and the brown loafers I only put on for funerals, weddings, and things pretending not to be either. In the parking lot, Stephen looked at my truck, then at me, and said almost casually, "Next time, maybe take Caroline's car." This crowd notices things. I still hear that sentence exactly the way he said it. Notices things. Inside, they sat me beside a hedge fund man with a watch thick as a padlock and a woman who kept calling everyone dear without ever sounding kind. Stephen introduced me not as the man who built a business with his hands or the father who kept their lives from caving in twice, but as Arthur, Caroline's dad. He's had a rough year, so we're helping him simplify. Simplify. That word started showing up everywhere. On the kitchen counter. In conversations that stopped when I entered. In the way Caroline asked whether I still needed all the maintenance on the cabin. In the way she mentioned more than once that waterfront properties were peaking again. One night I came down for water around midnight and heard voices from the pantry. The door was cracked 2 inches. Stefan said, "The shop is the problem. If he hangs on to the shop, he thinks he has options. Caroline whispered back, then we frame it as safety. Liability. You know he can't manage all that alone. He doesn't need to agree, Stephen said. He needs to be managed. I stood there in socks on cold tile with my hand around a glass so tight, I was surprised it didn't burst in my palm. Then my phone rang 2 mornings later, and a woman I had known for 15 years asked me to come downtown before my own meeting. Naomi Keene had handled May's will. She was one of those lawyers who never tried to sound like television. No false softness, no machine gun jargon, just plain words and a face that usually told the truth faster than her mouth did. Arthur, she said, I would appreciate it if you came in early today, alone. Why? A pause. Papers moving. Then, because I think you should hear some things before anyone asks you to sign them. That was how I ended up outside that frosted glass door, listening to my daughter decide how much pocket money I should be allowed from the sale of my own life. I didn't go in right away. I couldn't. My legs wouldn't obey me. Through the glass I could make out Caroline's outline. Cream coat, straight back, chin lifted the way May used to lift hers before saying grace. Stephen was seated beside her, one ankle over one knee, probably checking his reflection in the dark screen of his phone. Caroline said, We've been carrying him for months. Groceries, medications, supervision, everything. If the assets are sold, reimbursement comes to us first. He's not getting a penny directly. That would be irresponsible. Naomi's voice clipped now. Mr. Bell is the owner of the cabin, the shop, and the operating accounts. Stephen answered before Caroline could, and Mr. Bell has shown concerning signs of cognitive decline. We're trying to prevent damage. This is standard. Cognitive decline. That phrase did something to me no insult had managed to do. Because an insult attacks your pride. That attacked your existence. It told the room you were already leaving, and the decent people should stop asking your permission. My hand was shaking so badly I had to put the key in my coat pocket before it hit the floor. Then Naomi opened the conference room door, looked straight at me, and said, very calmly, Arthur, come with me. Caroline's face changed in 4 separate stages when she saw me. Annoyance, surprise, fear. Then that quick practiced grief she wore when she needed to look like the injured party. Dad, she said, standing. We were just trying to make things easier. I looked at her, then at Stephen, then at the stack of paper in front of them. There was a brochure from Brookside on top of the folder. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. Naomi stepped between us and guided me into her office. She closed the door, shut the blinds, and slid a legal pad across the desk, not for notes, but because she had seen men my age need somewhere to keep their hands. I'm going to show you everything, she said. What she showed me came in layers. First, there was the trust amendment Caroline wanted me to sign. It transferred immediate control of my cabin, shop, and liquid assets into a family management trust with Caroline as acting trustee on the basis of observed impairment. I would receive a monthly distribution of $400 for personal incidentals. Everything else, every account, every repair decision, every sale, would go through her and Stephen. Then came the reimbursement schedule. 10 months of rent for the guest room, groceries, transport assistance, medication oversight, household labor, lawn maintenance, which was especially rich, considering I had been the one mowing their yard every Friday because Stephen's back always hurt on days involving effort. By their numbers, I owed them nearly $82,000. There was more, a draft guardianship petition, prepared but not yet filed, stating that I had become forgetful, impulsive, emotionally unstable, and unsafe to live alone. Notes from a concierge physician Stephen played golf with. A suggested timeline for moving me into Brookside before summer market acceleration. A quiet listing packet for the lake house prepared by one of Stephen's real estate friends. Square footage, drone shots, charming legacy retreat with premium shoreline. My shoreline, May's hydrangeas beside the porch. The cedar swing I hung the summer. Caroline turned 13. And then Naomi turned one page toward me and tapped an email. Use the dementia angle if he digs in, Stephen had written. Once Brookside takes him, we can liquidate fast. Arthur always cared more about appearances than paperwork. I actually laughed when I read that, and the laugh sounded bad, like something tearing. Because if there was one thing I had never cared about, it was appearances. I had spent my whole life in boots, with cracked hands and a ring of dust around my cuffs. Stephen, on the other hand, ironed his jeans, Naomi let the silence sit. Why call me? I asked finally. My voice barely sounded like mine. Why not just refuse them? I did refuse to represent them in any contested capacity, she said. But they came to me, because I handled May's estate and know the property history. They assumed you'd sign whatever was put in front of you. When Miss Hollis, she still called Caroline by her married name in the office, which somehow hurt more, said you wouldn't understand the paperwork anyway, I decided I would rather have a difficult afternoon than watch a fraud develop in slow motion. I stared at the window blinds, thin slashes of light across the desk, my wife's name on the folder tab, my daughter's handwriting in the margin of one page. Dad can't keep making emotional decisions, Naomi said, more gently now. Arthur, do you currently want to sell the cabin? No. The shop? No. Do you understand the effect of the documents they want you to sign? Yes. Good, then the first thing we do is protect your capacity on paper, since they're trying to attack it. That was the moment something in me stopped begging for a different version of my daughter to appear. I did not burst into the conference room. I did not shout. I did not throw the folder or demand an explanation. A younger man might have mistaken noise for power, but I had spent 45 years cutting wood against a line. You learn something doing that long enough. Anger jumps, precision lands. So I asked Naomi for copies. Every page, every draft, every email she was ethically allowed to preserve. Then I walked out through the side exit, got into my truck, shut the door, and sat there with my forehead against the steering wheel while the cab filled with the smell of old coffee, sawdust, and the pine air freshener May used to mock me for buying. I didn't cry right away. What I did first was take the brass key out of my pocket and look at the dried clay on the ribbon. That was when I understood the drawer, the photographs, the fake concern, the whispers about safety. They had not been worrying about me. They had been measuring me. And that was the photograph I sent, not to Caroline, to Leo. The photograph was of Stephen's email on Naomi's desk, the line about the dementia angle framed clear as a knife. I texted it with 6 words, change every lock. Don't call me, Leo wrote back in under a minute. Done. By noon, the locks at the shop had been replaced. By 2, a locksmith Naomi trusted was meeting me at the lake house. By 3, my bank had copies of a revocation of every power I had ever signed for Caroline in a moment of trust. By 4, Naomi had scheduled an independent cognitive evaluation with a geriatric specialist who did not golf with Stephen, dine with Stephen, or owe Stephen anything. I still didn't know how ugly they were willing to make it. The lake house smelled the way it always did when I first opened it, after being gone too long. Cold wood, old coffee filters, a trace of the mineral dampness that lived under the sink, no matter how many times I fixed the line. But something was off before I even reached the porch. The front doormat was crooked. That sounds small until you've spent 40 years with the same mat and know exactly how May used to kick the right edge straight with the side of her slipper. Crooked told me strangers had come through fast, not caring how things sat after. Inside, 2 dining chairs had been moved 6 inches toward the window. The Afghan on the couch was folded wrong. The bedroom closet door upstairs was not fully latched. Someone had opened it and closed it with the impatience of a person checking dimensions, not memories. On the back deck, near the rail, I found the little black suction cup mark a photographer's stabilizer leaves on painted wood. I stood there looking at the water while Leo changed the last lock, and I had the strangest thought. Not that my daughter wanted my property. Not even that she had planned my confinement. The strangest thought was that she must have walked through that house with strangers and translated every room into money without hearing her mother anywhere. That realization hurt more than the legal papers. I spent that night at the cabin, wrapped in May's blanket, listening to the old refrigerator click on and off. Around 1 in the morning, my phone lit up with Caroline's name. I let it ring, then a voicemail. Dad. Naomi says you left without finishing the meeting. Please don't spiral over this. Nobody is taking anything from you. We're trying to put proper guardrails in place before something happens. Something happens? The language always gets interesting when people want your consent for your own reduction. The next day she came to the shop in sunglasses and a camel coat, carrying coffee I didn't ask for. She closed the office door behind her and set the cup on my desk like an offering. You embarrassed me, she said. That was her first sentence. Not are you okay? Not why did you leave? Not I'm sorry you overheard that. You embarrassed me, she repeated, sitting down. Naomi made me sound predatory. I looked at her, really looked. Same dark eyes as May, same sharp little crease by the mouth. But May's face used to soften when she was wrong. Caroline's hardened. You tried to price out my life on a spreadsheet, I said. Her shoulders lifted, fell. Because someone has to be realistic. You are not functioning the way you were 2 years ago. I'm working full-time. You forget things. Names sometimes. Not ownership. She flinched at that, then leaned forward and lowered her voice into the tone people use with toddlers and the old when they want to sound patient while tightening the leash. Dad, listen to me carefully. This is not punishment. This is structure. You lost Mom. You got hurt. You're isolated. The cabin is too much. The shop is a liability and I have a family. We cannot keep absorbing your unpredictability. There it was. The truth, stripped of sympathy, not care. Cost, I said. You've been using my key. Her eyes darted once to my coat pocket. We checked on the place. You should be thanking us. With a photographer, with a realtor friend informally. We needed information. The whole thing had a corporate plural to it. Like my daughter had merged with a boardroom and was now speaking on behalf of an entity. What did May ever do to make you think that house was yours to inventory? I asked. That landed. For a second, real anger cracked through her polish. Mom would have wanted efficiency, she snapped. Not this shrine you're turning into a burden. I stood up so slowly, she mistook it for weakness until she realized I wasn't shaking. No, I said. Your mother wanted a place where people were safe. Caroline grabbed her purse. Fine, then don't sign. We'll do this another way. I thought that was the threat. It wasn't. 3 days later, a deputy sheriff met me at the cabin gate with a manila envelope in his hand and pity in his eyes. Emergency petition for temporary guardianship. Caroline had filed anyway. According to the petition, I had become paranoid, financially reckless, and susceptible to manipulation. According to the attached statement from Dr. Alan Mercer, the golfer, I had shown probable cognitive decline based on secondhand reports and a brief social encounter at a holiday fundraiser months earlier. According to Stephen, I had been obsessing over old objects and withdrawing from healthy family contact. According to Caroline, I had become fixated on the belief that others wanted to take his property, which would have been funny if it hadn't been attached to a demand for the state to let them take control of my property. But the thing inside that envelope that made my hand go cold wasn't the petition. It was the purchase agreement. A draft contract for the sale of my lake house to an investor Stephen knew, contingent on transition of owner to managed care placement within 30 days. They had a buyer. They had a number. They had a timeline. That was the midpoint where every loose thread knotted into a noose. The brochure, the muddy ribbon, the photographer, the pantry whispers, the brunch language. They had not been thinking in abstractions. They had been building a schedule for my removal. Naomi met me at the courthouse steps that afternoon and read the look on my face before I said a word. They filed? She asked. I handed her the envelope. She'd fast. Her jaw tightened. Good, she said. I stared at her. Good, she said again, sharper now. Because now they've committed to a lie in writing. That was when the fight stopped being private. Over the next 4 days, my life turned into folders. Naomi got the independent evaluation. Intact cognition, mild grief-related sleep disruption, no evidence of impairment. She subpoenaed the realtor packet and the communication trail behind it. Leo printed years of payroll records and the paper trail showing I still ran the shop cleanly and profitably. I pulled old bank statements, tuition receipts, the wire transfer from Stephen's tax mess, copies of checks I had written for Caroline's down payment, and the promissory note Stephen had signed 3 years earlier when I bailed him out, the one he treated like a family favor whenever it suited him, and a non-existent document the rest of the time. Then Ruby called me. Ruby was Caroline's daughter, 19, in community college, with a silver nose ring Caroline hated and more honesty in one thumbnail than most adults carry in a chest cavity. She showed up at the cabin near dusk in a rain jacket, 2 sizes too big, her sneakers soaked through from the gravel road. Mom says you're refusing treatment, she said before she even sat down. I handed her a towel and let the kettle whistle. Your mother says a lot of things when she wants the room arranged a certain way. Ruby looked at me hard. Did they really try to put you in Brookside? I didn't answer fast enough. That answer was enough. She pulled out her phone, tapped twice, and held it toward me. I heard them fighting the night you moved back here. I recorded part of it because I thought Steven was cheating again or something. I didn't know what it was then. The audio was crackly. Cabinet doors, footsteps, Steven cursing under his breath. Then Caroline, furious in a way I had almost never heard her as a child. If he gets to the cabin paperwork first, we lose everything, she said. Stephen answered, then stop acting like his daughter, and act like his handler. Then Caroline again, lower, colder. Once Brookside takes him, he won't know what's sold. Ruby turned the phone off. For a second, I couldn't speak. Not because it shocked me anymore. At that point, shock had burned off. But because there was my daughter's voice, stripped completely free of spin, saying the quiet part to the dark. Robbie swallowed. I'm sorry. I reached across the table and touched her wrist. None of this is yours. She nodded. But she had my daughter's chin, and I could see the hurt setting in anyway. What happens now? She asked. I looked past her through the kitchen window to the dock, where rain was hammering the lake into a hard gray skin. Now, I said, they say it where a judge can hear it. The hearing was set for Friday morning. Caroline arrived in a cream suit and pearls. May had left her, which I noticed immediately and wished I hadn't. Stephen came in blue tie, polished shoes, haircut fresh enough to shine under fluorescent light. They looked exactly like the kind of people a stranger would trust for 5 dangerous minutes. I came in wearing my work jacket over a pressed shirt, because I was done dressing for other people's comfort. The courtroom smelled like old paper, floor wax, and coffee that had died in the pot before sunrise. Naomi sat beside me with 3 binders tabbed in yellow. Ruby sat in the back row, jaw set, hands tucked between her knees. Leo was there too, and one of my longtime clients, Mrs. Dorsey, who had once watched me rebuild her staircase after a house fire and said if I ever needed someone to say I was competent enough to carry both beauty and grief at the same time, she would show up. So she did. When the judge called the case, Caroline lowered her eyes like someone preparing to suffer with grace. Their lawyer stood first. He spoke in that sorrowful, professional voice people rent when they want cruelty to sound orderly. He talked about concern, decline, escalating risk, stubbornness, isolation. He called me vulnerable. He called my resistance evidence of confusion. He said my fixation on the lake house had become emotionally disproportionate. I wanted to laugh at that one. Of course it was emotionally disproportionate. My wife had died. My daughter was trying to bury me alive on paper. What would proportion have looked like? Then he called Caroline. She testified with a tissue in her hand and water in her voice. She said she had tried everything. She said she worried I'd forget the stove, fall on the dock, get taken advantage of at the shop. She said she and Stephen had opened their home to me and been met with volatility and suspicion. When asked about the trust proposal, she called it a protective framework. When asked about Brookside, she said it had only been one option among many. When asked about the sale packet, she said it was preliminary planning. Then Naomi stood up. That should have been the end of their performance. It wasn't. Naomi started gently. Too gently for Caroline to feel the floor shifting under her. Mrs. Hollis, she said, you testified that your father has become forgetful. Can you name his current foreman at the millwork shop? Caroline blinked. I'm not sure. His lead finisher? I don't know. The monthly payroll amount? No. The current balance on the operating account you say he can no longer manage? Their lawyer objected. The judge overruled. Naomi walked Caroline, inch by inch, into the very thing she had tried to assign to me. Ignorance. Then she moved to the reimbursement spreadsheet. Isn't it true? Naomi asked. That you billed your father retroactively for lawn maintenance during months, in which his phone location and witnesses place him mowing your yard himself. Caroline went still. Isn't it true that you listed medication management on weeks when Mr. Bell filled his own prescriptions and attended his own follow-up appointments? Those were estimates, Caroline said. Estimates, Naomi repeated, holding up the page. Charged to the owner of the assets you wanted transferred. Stephen shifted in his chair for the first time. Then Naomi introduced the independent cognitive evaluation. Clean, clear, direct. No impairment. Their lawyer tried to minimize it. Grief can fluctuate. Capacity can vary. Naomi agreed, almost pleasantly, then laid the draft purchase contract beside the petition. Mrs. Hollis, if this was simply about safety, she asked, why had you already arranged a conditional sale of the lake house before any court found your father incapable? Caroline's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The stiffen leaned toward his lawyer. Too late, Naomi pressed on. And why did your husband email a business associate the phrase, use the dementia angle if he digs in? The room changed on that line. You could feel it, like a current snapping from one wire to another. Their lawyer objected so fast his chair scraped. Naomi was already handing the judge a printed copy with metadata attached. Sturfin actually said, out loud, that was taken out of context. Naomi turned to him. Would you like to explain the context, Mr. Hollis? He looked at the judge, realized nobody had invited him, and sat back down hard. Then Ruby took the stand. I did not want that. I never wanted it. But Ruby asked Naomi the night before if she could speak, and Naomi told her only if she understood two things. First, that truth is heavier in court than it is on a phone, and second, that once spoken, it does not crawl back into your pocket. Ruby understood. She testified that she lived in the house, heard the conversations, saw the Brookside brochure on the kitchen island, and recorded the argument without telling anyone. Her voice trembled only once, when Naomi asked whether she recognized the voices in the recording. My mom's, she said, and Stephen's. The audio played through the courtroom speakers, static footsteps. Then Caroline, my little girl with the skinned knees I used to bandage at the sink, saying, once Brookside takes him, he won't know what's sold. You never think you can feel your heart break twice in exactly the same place until it happens. Caroline started crying then. Real tears this time. But there are tears that come from pain, and tears that come from collapse. And by then I had learned the difference. Stefan lost his temper first. This is absurd, he snapped, half rising. We were trying to prevent financial waste. He's been living in the past for years. That property is dead capital. Dead capital. He said it about the house where May kept Caroline's height marks on the pantry trim until she was 17. The judge's face cooled by several degrees. Naomi did not pounce. She didn't have to. She just slid one last folder onto the evidence table. Receipts, checks, promissory note, tuition statements, the restaurant tax wire, the down payment transfer. A clean ledger of every time I had put my back, my money, or my future under theirs and called it family. Then she said very quietly, Your Honor, this is not a guardianship case. It is an attempted asset seizure dressed up as filial concern. That was the line that broke the room open. The judge denied the emergency petition from the bench. Not postponed. Denied. Then he did the part I will remember until I die. He looked directly at Caroline and Stephen and said, Concern for a parent does not include pre-selling his home, limiting his funds, and planning his institutionalization without a finding of incapacity. What I see here is not protection. It is control. He referred the matter for review under elder exploitation statutes. He ordered immediate withdrawal of all property sale efforts. He directed that no further action be taken regarding my residence, business, or accounts without my explicit authorization. And he told Caroline and Stephen, in a tone calm enough to cut steel, that if any retaliatory conduct occurred, the court would receive it with interest. That should have been enough. It still wasn't the end. Because outside the courtroom doors, while Caroline was trying to pull herself together and Stephen was hissing into his phone, Naomi handed me another envelope and said, Whenever you're ready. I walked into the hallway where they stood, stopped 6 feet away, and held out the envelope. Stephen stared at it. What now? Your note, I said. The one you thought time had dissolved. Caroline looked between us. Dad? No, I said. And for the first time that whole week, I let her hear the full weight in my voice. Not volume, weight. You don't get to call me that while trying to warehouse me. The hallway went silent. I told Stephen the promissory note was due in full. 30 days. Not because I wanted revenge, because I was done financing my own erasure. Then I told Caroline the lake house and the shop had already been placed into the Maybell Legacy Trust that morning. Not for her. Not for Stephen. For my care if I ever truly needed it, for the employees who had helped me build the shop into something honest, and after that, for Ruby's education, and a small apprenticeship fund for local kids who wanted to learn work that left a real thing behind. I had protected what their greed had forced me to define. Caroline looked like I had slapped her. You're cutting me out, she whispered. I thought about the brochure in the drawer, the damp ribbon. The phrase dead capital. The allowance. The buyer waiting for me to disappear. No, I said. You cut yourself out. Stephen lunged then, not at me exactly, but forward, enough for the deputy near the courtroom door to step between us. His face had gone blotchy, eyes wild, tie crooked for the first time in his adult life. This is because of that little recording? He said. You're going to blow up your family over one fight? I almost answered. Ruby answered first. She had come into the hallway without my noticing. No, she said. You blew it up when you started pricing him. Nobody had anything better to say after that. The fallout came fast, but not all at once. Real consequences rarely do. They come in invoices, silence, returned calls, canceled plans, changed locks. And the faces people make when the story they've been telling about themselves stops working on strangers. Stefan's investor backed out of the cabin deal the same day the court order went through. 2 weeks later, his firm put him on leave after learning why his name had appeared in a referral notice. The promissory note forced a refinance they couldn't hide from anymore. They sold one of their cars. Then the White House went on the market by the end of summer, not because I took pleasure in it, but because numbers are less sentimental than people. Caroline sent me 3 emails I read and did not answer. The first one was angry. The second was legalistic. The third used the phrase, if this was all a misunderstanding, and that told me everything I needed to know about the distance between remorse and inconvenience. Ruby kept coming to the cabin. At first she came quietly, like someone entering a church after being away too long. Then she started bringing groceries, sketchbooks, cheap bakery muffins, and questions about her grandmother she realized she should have asked years earlier. We sat on the back porch in June, then July, then early September, and I told her how May sang to the radio while painting window trim, how she cheated at Scrabble by pretending she hadn't seen a word, how she once made me drive 40 miles back to the lake because Caroline at age 9 had left a stuffed rabbit on the bunk bed, and May said, "No child of mine is learning that home forgets you." The shop steadied too. Leo took on more estimating. I cut back on the jobs that wrecked my knee and kept the work that still made my chest loosen when I ran my hand over a finished edge. On Saturdays, 2 high school boys from town started coming by under the apprenticeship fund. Good kids. Awkward. Hungry to matter. I taught them how to square a cabinet face and how to listen when a board tells you where it wants to split. And me? The strangest part is that once the fight was over, the biggest feeling wasn't triumph. It was clarity. I had spent months confusing access with love. Because she was my daughter, I kept translating every wound into stress, every insult into worry, every act of trespass into bad phrasing from tired people. Fathers do that. We remember the child with the fevered forehead, the little hand in ours crossing the parking lot, the bicycle with one training wheel still attached. We keep offering the memory of who they were as collateral for who they've become. But blood does not make a person safe. Conduct does. By October, almost a year after May died, I moved my clothes back into the lake house for good. Not in grief this time. In decision, I put May's blanket back on our bed. I straightened the doormat. I took the Brookside brochure Naomi had kept in the evidence copy and fed it into the wood stove one rainy evening just to watch the glossy paper curl black at the edges. And on the first cold morning that actually felt like fall again, Ruby came over with a can of blue paint and helped me touch up the porch rail where winter had gnawed it thin. Halfway through, she looked at the hook by the door where May used to hang the brass key and said, "You should put it back there." So I did. The ribbon was faded, almost white now, the brass dull from years of hands and weather, but when it settled against the wood, something in the house settled too. I stood there with paint on my fingers, lake wind moving through the screen, my granddaughter laughing softly behind me over something I'd done wrong with the brush, and I realized I was no longer waiting for anyone to give my dignity back. I had it, and every night since. Before I turn out the porch light, I check that old key on its hook. Not because I'm afraid someone will steal it again, but because I like seeing it where it belongs. In the right house, held by the right hands.